Before we get into today's stories, I want to thank today's sponsor, ZocDoc. A lot of the stories I cover start with something small, like a feeling you brush off or a detail you tell yourself isn't important. It is that subtle gut feeling that tells you something in your environment is not quite right, but you choose to ignore it. And honestly, that's not too different from how a lot of us treat our own health, like a weird pain, or just the mental stress of knowing you probably should see a doctor, but putting it off anyway. I caught myself doing the same thing, telling myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. That's when I used ZocDoc, and it actually made the whole process painless. ZocDoc is a free website that lets you search for in-network doctors, compare them by specialty, see real appointment availability, and book instantly. In many cases, you can get in within just a couple of days. You can read verified patient reviews, check out doctor profiles, and choose someone you're genuinely comfortable with no awkward phone calls. What I loved was being able to find a doctor who had next-day availability and reviews that specifically mentioned listening and taking patients seriously. That matters because walking into an appointment already feels stressful enough. So, if you've been avoiding a doctor's visit or just want an easier way to find someone you actually trust, head over to ZocDoc.com/nightmare and see what's available in your area. It only takes a few clicks. I went camping alone last winter with my dog Roscoe, and it is something I will never do again. I had taken days off work and wanted to get away from people. I loaded my truck and drove up a long narrow trail that cut deep into a state forest. The road was barely maintained, covered in packed snow and ice, and there were no other cars anywhere. After driving for almost an hour, I parked at a small pull-off that looked like it had not been used in a long time. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes with my pack and Roscoe until I reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was deep and untouched. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else being around recently. That was what I wanted. I set my pack down, cleared a spot for a tent, and let Roscoe wander around while I worked. He stayed close, sniffing the snow. I pitched the tent, staked it down hard because the ground was frozen, and laid out my sleeping pad and winter-rated sleeping bag inside. I knew it was going to be well below freezing, so I layered properly with thermals and a heavy jacket. Once ready, I built a small fire. I started a fire and let it burn down until I had a steady flame. I cooked dinner over it, just a simple meal, and sat on a log eating while Roscoe lay near the fire. The woods were quiet in that deep winter way where sound feels almost non-existent. I learned a long time ago from my dad that snow actually absorbs sound. After I ate, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking toward the trees. It did not concern me at first. Deer were everywhere out there, and he had barked at them before. I told him to relax, and he did after a minute, sitting back down. I checked the time and decided I would stay up a bit longer by the fire before turning in. I always carried a handgun when camping, and it was holstered at my side like always. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started barking again, louder this time. Then I heard it too. Footsteps moving through the snow somewhere out in the woods. I stood up and listened. The steps stopped, then started again. Roscoe went from barking to growling, then suddenly went silent. He stood staring straight ahead toward the trees. That was when I felt uneasy. I followed his gaze and saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half hidden in the darkness, just barely lit by the fire. I called out saying that he scared me and telling Roscoe it was okay. The figure did not move at first. Then he stepped forward slightly enough for me to see that it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there that deep in the woods. His tone was not friendly. I told him I was just getting out into nature with my dog. He did not respond right away. He just stood there watching me. I could feel the situation turning wrong. I told him calmly that I was armed. The man slightly laughed and said something about me threatening him, instead of inviting him to join me, and asked where my hospitality was. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the woods. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the trees. Roscoe stayed close to me. I did not like any of it, but eventually I told myself he was gone. I put out the fire carefully, throwing snow on it and stirring the ashes until there was nothing left that could glow. I did not want light drawing attention. I crawled into my tent and sealed it up. Inside, I did everything I could to stay warm, laying my sleeping pad down to block the cold ground. I stayed fully dressed, pulled on a knit hat, and cinched my sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. I kept a hand warmer near my core and another near my feet. Roscoe curled up next to me, his body heat helping more than anything. I lay there listening to the woods, or rather the extreme silence. After a while, Roscoe started growling again. Then I heard what he was growling at: footsteps in the snow. They stopped and Roscoe quieted, but his ears were still perked up. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time and slower than before. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe began howling loudly. I whispered for him to stop, terrified of drawing attention. When he did stop, he went back to growling. Whoever it was just stood outside the tent. I could hear subtle movement like the shift of weight in the snow. I had my gun in my hand now, but I did not want to make threats. I did not want to be forced to follow through with the threats. I have never actually shot anyone, and I do not think I have it in me to kill someone, even in self-defense. Finally, I cannot take it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun, and that whoever was there needed to leave now. But realistically, who else could it have been besides that creepy guy from before? There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from the tent. Slowly at first, then faster before disappearing into the woods. I did not unzip the tent to look out. I stayed frozen for hours. Roscoe stayed alert the entire time, which was the only reason I even felt remotely comfortable, eventually nodding off. I certainly would not have if I were alone. I barely slept, drifting off only in short bursts. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could at the crack of dawn. We hiked back to my truck and drove away. I never went back to that part of the woods again, and I never will. Creeps like that guy really make life scary sometimes, and remind you that you can never really let your guard down. This next story takes place during the July 4th weekend in 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina to visit a good friend named Mark, whom I had not seen in years. He was there on an internship for his law program, and staying in a house in the city. I was visiting for the weekend, and spending the night downstairs on a couch by some windows. When the night settled in, I went back downstairs to the couch by the windows that faced another apartment building and a small labyrinth of alleyways with an abandoned house across the street. The next day we went to the main Charleston market. We walked through it and eventually came out near the docks by the water. That was when we saw him. A man in a wedding suit was shambling down the road near the water. He wore a crisp bow tie and clean dress shoes. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion. The market behind us was loud and busy. Yet this man moved alone across the street with a slow, detached movement. He did not notice us and seemed to be in his own world. If we crossed the street, we would have walked straight into him. Instinctively, I wanted to avoid him. I grabbed Mark by the arm and told him we were not crossing. We walked to the right, deeper into the city, and picked up our pace. He was moving slowly, so we created distance easily. I told Mark it was strange and that the guy did not look homeless. His clothes were too clean, too crisp. Something about him felt wrong, Mark agreed. We kept walking for a while. A few streets later on, another busy stretch of Charleston, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. That same man with the same shambling movement. He was far down the street, diagonal to us, moving at the same slow pace. Somehow he caught up to us, even though there was no clear way he could have reached that spot without us seeing him. I pointed him out to Mark and we both stared. It made no sense. He was in a completely different part of the city, but moving exactly the same way. We pushed it aside and kept exploring Charleston. The next day was July 4th, and that night, we watched the fireworks on an island about 20 minutes from the city. By then, we had mostly forgotten about the man in the suit, assuming he was just some strange person wandering around. That night, we decided to go on a ghost tour, which we had already planned before the trip. It was my last night in Charleston on July 5th, and the city was packed. It was a busy Saturday night with crowds everywhere, lights pouring from restaurants, and that historical atmosphere Charleston has after sunset. We finished the ghost tour and walked through the main area of the city, filled with restaurants and nightlife. The street was crowded, and a particular wave of people was moving toward us and quite fast. As this group approached, both Mark and I noticed something at the exact same moment. It was him, the same man in the same wedding suit, with the same bow tie, and the same black curly hair, shambling in the middle of the crowd as if he had been placed there. He stood out instantly. His movement was completely different from everyone else. He did not blend in. No one around him noticed him. Two people were walking right beside him, and he brushed between them without either of them reacting. He kept the same slow, unsettling pace, while the entire crowd moved normally around him. He glanced at us for a brief second, and then continued forward. It was as if he was tied to the movement of the crowd without truly being part of it. Mark and I looked at each other in shock. It made no sense. He did not belong there, and something in both of us recognized that immediately. We watched him move down the street until the crowd thinned out. When it did, we saw him clearly, still shambling, still moving at that same unnatural pace, disappearing into a darker side street until he turned a corner. We were quiet, not panicking, but deeply unsettled. The same man in the same suit appearing multiple times, always shambling and out of place. Both of us knew something was wrong. Later that night, we returned to the house. Mark went upstairs to his room, and I went downstairs to sleep. I shut the blinds and tried to settle in. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a tap on the window. I froze. After a few moments, I forced myself to look. I lifted the blind slightly and looked down the alley. At the far end, I saw the back of a man turning the corner. It was him again. He moved out of sight, but right before he disappeared, he looked back toward the window. I told Mark the next morning. I explained what I saw, and even he admitted that the entire experience was disturbing. He does not believe in anything paranormal, and he is extremely logical and grounded, but even he was shaken. As for me, I am more spiritually sensitive,